On Christmas Eve, I gave my last $5 to a stranger at a bus stop, not knowing my daughter-in-law was already planning where I'd spend the rest of my life without them. The wind cut through my coat like it always did when the heater at home had been turned down again, and I stood there counting the seconds between each passing car, wondering how everything had gotten so quiet so quickly. It hadn't always been like this. There was a time when Christmas meant a full table, warm lights, laughter echoing off the walls, my husband carving the turkey while my son hovered nearby, impatient and smiling. Now, the house felt too big, too still, like it was waiting for something that never came. Earlier that evening, I had stood in my own kitchen, just outside the dining room, listening without meaning to. Jessica's voice was low, but sharp enough to carry. She had that tone she used when she thought she was being practical, the kind that made everything sound reasonable even when it wasn't. "It's time, Ethan," she said. "She can't stay here forever. There are places for people like her. Somewhere safe. Somewhere appropriate." There was a pause, long enough for me to hold my breath. I waited for my son to say something, anything, to push back, to remind her that I wasn't just someone like her. But when Ethan finally spoke, his voice was softer than I remembered. Maybe after the holidays," he said. "Not no, just later." I stepped away before they could see me, my hands steady even though something inside me had shifted, like a door quietly closing. I didn't cry. I didn't confront them. I simply put on my coat, reached into my purse, and found a single $5 bill folded neatly in the corner. That was all I had left until the end of the month. The bus stop was nearly empty, just a flickering overhead light and a bench that had seen better days. That's when I noticed him. He stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, looking at the bus schedule like it might change if he stared long enough. He didn't look homeless, not exactly. His coat was clean, his shoes worn but not broken. Still, there was something about the way he shifted his weight, the way he glanced at the road and then back at the sign, that felt familiar. Hesitation, pride, the quiet calculation of someone deciding whether to ask for help. He turned toward me eventually, his expression careful. "Ma'am," he said, his voice steady but tired. "I'm a little short on fare. Do you happen to have $5? For a moment, I almost laughed. $5. The exact amount in my purse. The exact amount I needed to get through the next few days. I could have said no. I should have said no. But instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out the bill, smoothing it between my fingers before handing it to him. "It's all I have," I said, more honestly than I'd planned. He looked at the money, then at me, something unreadable passing through his eyes. "Are you sure?" he asked. I nodded. "It's Christmas Eve," I said simply. "We all need a little help sometimes." He took the bill slowly, like it weighed more than it should. "Thank you," he said, but his gaze lingered, studying me in a way that made me feel seen, not pitied, not dismissed, just noticed. The bus arrived a few minutes later, its doors hissing open as warm air spilled out into the cold night. He stepped on first, then paused, turning back to look at me one more time. "You've helped more than you realize," he said quietly. I gave a small smile, the kind you offer a stranger you'll never see again. At least, that's what I thought. I had no idea that $5, given away without a second thought, was about to change everything I believed about loss, about family, and about what people are really capable of when they think no one is watching. When I stepped back into the house that night, the silence felt heavier than before, like it had been waiting for me to notice it. The lights in the living room were still on, casting a soft glow across the furniture I had dusted just that morning, but nothing about it felt warm. I closed the door quietly behind me, careful not to make a sound, even though no one was asleep. From the dining room, I could hear the faint clink of dishes and Jessica's voice again, lighter now, almost cheerful. It was a tone she never used with me. "We should call them. Tomorrow," she was saying. "The sooner we get her on a list, the better. Those places fill up fast." I paused in the hallway, my hand still resting on the edge of my coat. Ethan murmured something in response, too low for me to catch, but it did not matter. I had already heard enough. I slipped off my shoes and hung my coat on the rack, my movements slow and deliberate, as if I were afraid that any sudden motion might shatter whatever fragile control I still had. There was a time when this house had felt like mine, when every picture on the wall had a story I could tell without thinking, when every corner held a memory that belonged to me. Now, it felt like I was walking through someone else's life, careful not to leave fingerprints. I moved toward the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, the tap running longer than necessary, just so I would not have to listen to their voices. The glass trembled slightly in my hand, and I set it down on the counter before it could slip. $5. That was all I had left, and I had given it away without hesitation. The thought should have frightened me, but it did not. If anything, it made something inside me feel clearer, like a line had been drawn that I had not seen before. I leaned against the counter and stared at the small stack of unopened mail beside the fruit bowl, bills and notices that I had been stretching and rearranging for months, making each dollar last longer than it should have. I had told myself it was temporary. I had told myself Ethan was busy, that Jessica did not mean the things she said, that families went through phases. But standing there in my own kitchen, listening to plans being made about my future as if I were not part of it, I realized something I had been avoiding for a long time. This was not a phase. This was a decision, and it had been made without me. I picked up one of the envelopes and turned it over in my hands, then set it back down again. There was no point in opening it tonight. Instead, I walked slowly toward the stairs, each step measured, each creak of the wood familiar and strangely distant at the same time. Halfway up, I heard Jessica laugh softly, the sound carrying easily through the house. "It will be better for everyone," she said. "She will have people her own age. Activities. Supervision. Supervision." The word lingered in my mind as I reached the top of the stairs and paused, my hand resting on the banister. I had spent decades raising a son, managing a home, building a life piece by piece, and now I was being reduced to someone who needed supervision. I walked into my bedroom and closed the door gently behind me. The room was neat, just as I had left it that morning, the bed made, the curtains drawn halfway to let in the faint glow of the streetlights outside. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around, taking in the small details I had once taken for granted. The framed photo of Ethan as a boy, grinning with a missing front tooth. The quilt I had sewn by hand years ago, each square chosen carefully, each stitch a quiet act of love. I reached out and smoothed the fabric absent-mindedly, my fingers tracing the patterns as if they might anchor me to something that still made sense. Downstairs, their voices faded, replaced by the low hum of the television. Life continuing, just as it always did. I lay back slowly, staring at the ceiling, replaying the evening in my mind. The cold bus stop. The stranger's eyes. The weight of that $5 bill leaving my hand. I did not know why that moment stayed with me more than anything else, but it did. There had been something in the way he looked at me, something steady and deliberate, as if he had seen more than just an older woman with a worn coat and a quiet voice. As if he had understood something that even I had not fully admitted to myself yet. I closed my eyes, letting the memory settle, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something shift beneath the surface of my thoughts. Not fear, not even sadness. Something quieter, something sharper. The kind of awareness that comes just before everything changes. I woke up before the sun came up, the kind of quiet hour when the house still belongs to whoever rises first. For a moment, I lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to remember what day it was, what I was supposed to do, who I was supposed to be. Then it came back to me, not all at once, but in pieces. The voices from downstairs. The word supervision. The sound of my son agreeing without really saying anything at all. I sat up slowly, the quilt slipping from my shoulders, and listened. Nothing. No footsteps. No voices. Just the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs and the ticking of the clock in the hallway. I got dressed carefully, choosing the same sweater I had worn the day before, brushing it smooth as if that mattered. In the kitchen, the air felt colder than usual. The coffee maker was empty. No note on the counter. No sign that anyone had thought to ask if I wanted breakfast. I filled the kettle and waited, watching the small blue flame beneath it, steady and quiet. I had spent years making sure everyone else had what they needed before they even asked. Now, I was learning what it felt like to be an afterthought. When the water began to heat, I reached for a mug and paused. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I had expected anger, maybe even panic. Instead, there was only a kind of clarity, the same feeling that had settled over me the night before. I poured the hot water slowly and sat down at the small kitchen table by the window. Outside, the sky was pale gray, the kind that promised a cold day ahead. I wrapped my hands around the mug and let the warmth seep into my fingers. $5. I thought about that again, about the way it had felt to let it go. Not like a loss. Not really. More like a decision I had made without fully understanding why. I took a small sip and closed my eyes for a moment, replaying the stranger's face in my mind. There had been something different about him. Not his clothes. Not his words. It was the way he had looked at me, as if he was taking note of something important, something worth remembering. I opened my eyes and glanced toward the hallway as I heard footsteps on the stairs. Jessica appeared first, already dressed, her phone in hand, her expression focused on something on the screen. She barely looked at me as she walked into the kitchen. "Good morning," I said, my voice even. She glanced up briefly, offering a quick nod. "Morning," she replied, already distracted. Ethan followed a moment later, rubbing his eyes, his hair still slightly out of place. He looked at me, hesitated, then gave a small, polite smile. "Morning, Mom." Mom. The word sounded unfamiliar coming from him now, like something he said out of habit rather than meaning. "Morning," I said back, holding his gaze just long enough to notice the flicker of discomfort in his eyes before he looked away. Jessica set her phone down on the counter and leaned against it, her tone casual. "I was thinking we should start looking at options today," she said, not looking at me as she spoke. "There is a place about 20 minutes from here. Good reviews. Clean. Structured. Structured." Another word that felt carefully chosen. Ethan nodded slowly, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "Yeah," he said. "We should at least take a look." I watched them both, taking in the ease with which they discussed my future, the way they spoke around me instead of to me. I did not interrupt. I did not ask questions. I simply listened. After a moment, Jessica finally glanced in my direction. "We just want what is best for you," she said, her voice softening slightly, as if that made it kinder. I met her eyes, holding her gaze for a second longer than she expected. "Of course," I said quietly. "I understand." And I did, just not in the way she thought. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, taking a sip of his coffee. "We can go this afternoon," he added. "If that is okay." I nodded once, setting my mug down on the table with care. "That sounds fine," I said. Inside, something settled into place, calm and solid. They thought this was the beginning of something. They thought they were deciding what would happen to me. But as I sat there in that quiet kitchen, watching them plan a future that did not include me, I realized something they had not considered. I had already started deciding for myself. I spent the rest of the morning moving through the house as if nothing had changed, but every step felt different, like I was walking through a place I was about to leave behind. I washed the dishes that had been left in the sink, dried them carefully, and placed them back in the cabinets I had organized years ago. I straightened the living room, smoothing the cushions, aligning the picture frames, my hands lingering on each object just a second longer than necessary. It was not about cleaning. It was about remembering. Every corner of that house held something I had built, something I had chosen, something that had once meant stability. Now, it felt like I was quietly taking inventory of a life that was being dismissed without discussion. Around noon, Jessica called out from the hallway that they would be leaving in 20 minutes. Her voice carried the same efficient tone, like she was managing an appointment rather than discussing my future. I nodded even though she could not see me, then went upstairs to get my coat. I paused in the doorway of my bedroom, looking around slowly. The bed, the dresser, the small lamp on the nightstand. Everything was exactly where it had always been, but it no longer felt permanent. I picked up my purse and checked inside. Empty, except for a few receipts and a folded piece of paper I had forgotten about. I opened it absent-mindedly and saw it was an old grocery list written in my own handwriting, items I had once planned meals around, back when I still believed this house would always be my responsibility. I folded it again and slipped it back inside. Downstairs, Ethan was already by the door, keys in hand, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He looked at me as I approached, his expression uncertain, as if he wanted to say something but did not know how to begin. "Ready?" he asked quietly. I met his eyes, studying his face, the same face I had watched grow from a boy into a man. "Yes," I said simply. Jessica opened the front door before either of us could say anything else, stepping outside into the cold air without waiting. The drive was quiet. The heater hummed softly, filling the car with a dry warmth that did little to ease the tension. Jessica sat in the front passenger seat, scrolling through her phone, occasionally glancing at the directions. Ethan kept his eyes on the road, his hands gripping the steering wheel just a little tighter than usual. I sat in the back seat, watching the familiar streets pass by, each turn taking us farther from something I had once believed was secure. After about 20 minutes, we pulled into a parking lot in front of a large, beige building with neatly trimmed hedges and a sign that read, Willow Creek Senior Living. The words were clean, welcoming even, but there was something about them that felt final. Jessica stepped out first, smoothing her coat as she looked up at the building. "It looks nice," she said, her voice bright, almost relieved. Ethan nodded, though his expression remained guarded. I stepped out of the car more slowly, taking in the building, the wide windows, the carefully arranged benches near the entrance. Everything was designed to look comfortable, safe, controlled. Inside, the lobby was warm and softly lit, decorated with seasonal ornaments that felt more like decoration than celebration. A woman at the front desk greeted us with a practiced smile and introduced herself as Karen, the coordinator. She spoke directly to Jessica at first, explaining the amenities, the schedule, the activities, as if I were not standing right there. I listened without interrupting, my hands folded neatly in front of me. Eventually, Karen turned to me, her smile unchanged. "And how are you feeling about all of this?" she asked kindly. I held her gaze for a moment, considering the question. "I am listening," I said. She nodded, as if that was enough. We were led down a hallway lined with identical doors, each one closed, each one hiding a life that had been placed neatly into a system. Karen opened one of the doors and gestured inside. "This is one of our available rooms," she said. I stepped in, taking in the small bed, the single chair by the window, the compact dresser. It was clean. It was organized. It was not mine. I walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot, the same car we had arrived in still visible from where I stood. For a moment, I said nothing. Behind me, Jessica was asking questions about pricing and availability, her voice steady, practical. Ethan remained quiet. I placed my hand lightly on the windowsill, feeling the cool surface beneath my fingers, and something became very clear. This was not where my life ended. This was simply where they expected it to. And for the first time since I had overheard that conversation, I understood something with complete certainty. They had already decided what would happen to me. They just had not realized that I had already decided something else. I stood in that small room a few seconds longer than necessary, letting the silence settle around me, memorizing the feeling of it, not because I intended to stay, but because I wanted to understand exactly what they were offering me. Behind me, Jessica's voice continued, polite and engaged, asking about monthly costs, meal plans, and availability. She sounded relieved, as if she had finally found a solution that fit neatly into her life. Ethan said very little. When he did speak, it was only to agree, his words short, careful, like he was trying not to make the situation heavier than it already was. I turned away from the window and walked back toward them, my steps steady, my expression calm. Karen smiled again, her hands folded in front of her. "It is a comfortable space," she said. "Many of our residents feel at home very quickly." I nodded once, acknowledging her words without committing to them. "I am sure they do," I replied. Jessica glanced at me, searching my face for a reaction, something she could interpret as acceptance. "What do you think?" she asked, her tone light, almost hopeful. I met her eyes briefly, then looked around the room one more time. "It is very organized," I said. That was all. She smiled, as if that was enough. On the drive back, the air in the car felt different. Lighter for them. Clearer. A decision, in their minds, had already been made. Jessica talked more now, outlining next steps, mentioning paperwork, timelines, and how quickly things could be arranged after the holidays. Ethan nodded along, occasionally glancing at me in the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable. I sat quietly, watching the road unwind behind us, my hands resting in my lap, my thoughts moving with a quiet precision I had not felt in years. When we pulled into the driveway, Jessica was the first to step out again, already reaching for her phone as she spoke about calling the facility the next morning. Ethan lingered a moment longer in the car, his hand still on the steering wheel. "Mom," he said, his voice softer now, uncertain. I looked at him, waiting. He hesitated, then exhaled slowly. "We just want you to be somewhere safe," he added. "Safe." I held his gaze for a second, then nodded gently. "I understand," I said. And I did, just not in the way he meant. Inside the house, everything was exactly as we had left it that morning. The same quiet, the same stillness. Jessica moved through the living room with a sense of purpose, already acting as if the next phase had begun. I took off my coat and placed it carefully on the rack, smoothing the sleeve out of habit. My purse felt lighter than it ever had before, not because of what was inside it, but because of what was no longer weighing me down. I walked slowly into the kitchen and poured myself another glass of water, letting the familiar routine steady me. From the other room, I could hear Jessica making a call, her voice warm and polite, confirming details, asking questions, securing something she believed was inevitable. Ethan turned on the television, the low volume filling the space with background noise that did nothing to ease the distance between us. I stood there for a moment, then reached for the small notepad by the phone. My hand hovered over it briefly before I picked up a pen and wrote down a single line. Just a name. No explanation. No context. The name of the man from the bus stop. I did not know why I wrote it. He had never told me to contact him. He had not offered anything beyond a quiet thank you and a look I could not quite forget. But something about that moment stayed with me, something that felt unfinished. I folded the paper once and slipped it into my purse, next to the old grocery list. Not a plan. Not yet. Just a possibility. That night, as I lay in bed, I did not feel the same uncertainty that had followed me the night before. The house was still quiet. The future they had planned for me was still moving forward in their minds. But beneath that, something else had taken shape. A quiet understanding that I was not as powerless as they believed. That choices still existed, even if they were small, even if they began with something as simple as remembering a face, a voice, a moment at a bus stop. I closed my eyes slowly. Not to escape, but to think. Somewhere between what they expected and what I knew to be true, there was a path they could not see. And for the first time in a long time, I intended to find it. The next morning arrived quietly, without announcement, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I woke up before anyone else again, not because I had to, but because I could not sleep the way I used to. There was something about knowing your place in a home is no longer secure that changes the way your mind rests. I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, my hands folded in my lap, letting the stillness settle before I stood up. Downstairs, the kitchen felt exactly as it had the day before, clean but distant, familiar but no longer mine. I made myself a cup of hot water again, watching the steam rise slowly, and this time I did not pretend it was just another ordinary morning. Jessica came down shortly after, already dressed, her movements brisk and efficient. I spoke with Willow Creek this morning, she said, not looking at me as she reached for her phone on the counter. They have an opening next week. We can start the paperwork today. I nodded slightly, my expression unchanged. That sounds fast, I replied. She gave a small shrug. These things are better handled quickly, she said. Ethan followed a few minutes later, his usual hesitation still present, but now layered with something else. Relief. He poured himself coffee, glancing at me briefly. We can go back this afternoon if you want to see it again, he offered. I met his eyes for a moment, then looked down at my cup. That will not be necessary, I said calmly. Jessica paused, just for a second, then continued typing on her phone. Well, we will need to sign some forms regardless, she added. I can print everything out. I did not respond right away. Instead, I reached into my purse and felt the folded piece of paper between my fingers. The name I had written the night before. I pulled it out slowly, unfolding it with care, my eyes tracing the letters as if seeing them for the first time. Jessica noticed the movement. What is that? She asked, her tone casual but curious. I looked up, meeting her gaze briefly before answering. Just something I need to take care of today, I said. She frowned slightly, not understanding, but she did not press further. Ethan shifted his weight, watching me more closely now. Do you need help with anything? He asked. The question hung in the air, unfamiliar coming from him. I considered it for a moment, then shook my head gently. No, I said. I will manage. And I meant it. After breakfast, I put on my coat and picked up my purse, moving toward the front door with a quiet sense of purpose. Jessica looked up from the table. Where are you going? She asked. Out, I replied simply. She exchanged a glance with Ethan, then stood up slightly. Do you want one of us to drive you? I turned back to them, my expression calm, almost neutral. No, I said. I know my way. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Jessica nodded, though her eyes lingered on me as if trying to read something she could not quite understand. I stepped outside, the cold air hitting my face with a sharp clarity that felt almost welcome. The sky was pale again, the same muted gray as the day before, but everything felt different now. Not because anything had changed around me, but because something had changed within me. I walked slowly at first, then with more certainty, my steps steady on the sidewalk I had traveled countless times before. The bus stop came into view sooner than I expected, the same bench, the same flickering light, the same quiet presence it had held the night before. I sat down, placing my hands in my lap, and waited. I did not know if he would be there. I did not know if this was even the right place to start. But something told me that this was where the path had begun, and sometimes that is enough. Minutes passed. A car drove by. Then another. The world moved on, as it always does. And then, just as I was beginning to question my decision, I saw him. Not at the bus stop, but across the street, stepping out of a dark car that did not belong to someone who needed bus fare. He paused for a moment, adjusting his coat, then looked up. Our eyes met almost instantly, as if he had been expecting to see me there. He crossed the street without hesitation, his steps measured, confident, completely different from the man I had met the night before. "I was hoping I would see you again," he said as he approached, his voice calm, steady. I studied him closely now, taking in the details I had missed before. The quality of his coat, the way he carried himself, the quiet certainty in his eyes. "I was not sure you would," I replied. He smiled slightly, not wide, but genuine. "Most people would not come back," he said. I nodded once. "Most people would not give away their last $5, I answered. That seemed to catch his attention. He tilted his head slightly, studying me with the same careful focus as before. "Then I suppose we are both unusual," he said. There was a pause, brief but meaningful, and then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a business card, holding it out to me. "My name is Daniel Brooks," he said, "and I think we should talk." I looked down at the card, then back at him, the pieces beginning to shift into place in a way I could not yet fully explain. But I understood one thing with complete clarity. The path I had chosen the moment I stepped out of that house was no longer uncertain. It had already started unfolding in front of me. I took the card from his hand, the edges crisp, the lettering clean and deliberate. Daniel Brooks. The name sat there in simple black ink, but it carried weight, the kind you could feel without fully understanding why. I turned it over once, then slipped it carefully into my purse, next to the folded paper I no longer needed. "Talk about what?" I asked, keeping my voice even. He studied me for a moment, as if deciding how much to say. "About why someone would give away their last $5, he replied. I held his gaze, unflinching. "Maybe because I know what it feels like to need it," I said. He nodded slowly, as if that answer confirmed something he had already suspected. "And maybe," he added, "because you are used to putting other people first." The words landed quietly, but they were precise. Too precise to be a guess. I did not respond right away. Instead, I looked past him for a second, taking in the street, the passing cars, the ordinary movement of a morning that did not feel ordinary anymore. "You said we should talk," I said finally. "So talk." He gave a small smile, not condescending, not rushed, just measured. "Not here," he said. He gestured toward the car behind him, the same one I had noticed earlier, parked neatly along the curb. It was not flashy, but it was not modest either. Clean lines, polished surface, quiet confidence. I hesitated for a moment, not out of fear, but out of habit. A lifetime of being careful does not disappear overnight. He seemed to understand that. "You can choose where," he added. "A coffee shop. Somewhere public. I just prefer not to have this conversation on a sidewalk." That was fair. I nodded once. "There is a place 2 blocks down," I said. "Small. Quiet." "Perfect," he replied. We walked there together, not speaking much, the silence between us not uncomfortable, just observant. I was aware of him, the way he moved, the way people seemed to notice him without knowing why. He carried himself differently now, nothing like the man from the night before. Or maybe he had always been this way, and I had simply seen what I expected to see. Inside the coffee shop, the air was warm and filled with the soft hum of conversation and the scent of fresh coffee. We chose a table near the window, away from the crowd. I sat down first, placing my purse carefully on the chair beside me. He followed, sitting across from me, his posture relaxed but attentive. A server approached, and we ordered without much discussion. When she left, the quiet returned. "I did not need that $5, he said after a moment. I looked at him, waiting. "I was testing something," he continued. "Not you specifically, just people." I raised an eyebrow slightly. "That sounds like a strange habit," I said. He nodded. "It is," he admitted. "But it is also effective. Most people look away. Some apologize. A few offer advice. Very few give." I leaned back slightly, considering his words. "And what does that tell you?" I asked. "It tells me who acts without calculation," he said. "Who responds to need instead of evaluating it." I held his gaze, letting that settle between us. "And what did you decide?" "About me?" I asked. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a second card, placing it on the table in front of me. This one was different. Heavier. Embossed. The kind of card you do not hand out lightly. "I decided you were someone I would like to help," he said. I looked down at the card, then back at him. "I did not ask for help," I replied. His expression did not change. "I know," he said. "That is part of the reason." There was no pity in his voice. No assumption. Just a statement. I studied him carefully now, searching for something beneath the surface. A motive. A condition. Something that would explain why a man like him would be sitting across from me, offering something I had not requested. "Why?" I asked quietly. He leaned back slightly, his hands resting on the table. "Because I recognize patterns," he said. "And I saw something last night that does not happen often. Someone with very little, giving without hesitation." I thought about that for a moment, then shook my head slightly. "It was $5, I said. "It is not a life-changing decision." He looked at me steadily. "It was everything you had," he replied. That was different. That was not an observation. That was knowledge. I felt something shift again, deeper this time, more defined. "How do you know that?" I asked. He did not smile this time. "Because I made sure to find out," he said. The words were calm, but they carried a weight I could not ignore. I sat there, silent for a moment, the noise of the coffee shop fading into the background. Across from me, Daniel Brooks waited, not pushing, not rushing, just present. And for the first time since this all began, I realized something with complete clarity. This was no longer just about a stranger at a bus stop. This was something much larger. Something that had already begun to move beyond anything my son and his wife could see coming. The coffee between us had gone untouched, the steam long gone, leaving only the quiet weight of what he had just said hanging in the air. I looked down at the card again, then back at him, measuring every word, every pause, every detail the way I used to when something did not quite add up. "You looked into my life," I said, not as a question, but as a statement. He nodded once, without apology. "Only enough to understand the situation," he replied. "I do not interfere blindly." I let that settle. There was something unsettling about being seen so clearly, but there was also something else. Something honest. "And what situation do you think I am in?" I asked. He leaned forward slightly, his hands resting loosely on the table. "You are being transitioned out of your own life," he said calmly. Quietly. Efficiently. With language that makes it sound like care. The words were exact. Too exact to ignore. I did not react immediately. I simply held his gaze, letting the truth of it land without resistance. "That is a strong conclusion," I said after a moment. "It is an accurate one," he replied. There was no arrogance in his tone, just certainty. I sat back slightly, my fingers resting against the edge of the table, grounding myself in something physical. "And what exactly are you offering?" I asked. "Because I do not accept help that comes with conditions I cannot see." That seemed to be the answer he had been waiting for. He nodded once, as if something had just been confirmed. "I am offering you a choice," he said. "A real one. Not the kind that is presented to you as a formality while the outcome has already been decided." I watched him closely. "Go on," I said. He reached into his coat again, but this time instead of a card, he placed a small envelope on the table. It was unmarked, simple, the kind that did not draw attention. "Inside is a number," he said. "A contact. Someone who works with me. They can arrange housing, financial stability, and legal guidance if needed." I glanced at the envelope, but did not touch it yet. "Why would you do that?" I asked again, more quietly this time. He did not hesitate. "Because I have spent years building something that allows me to intervene when I see people being quietly erased from their own lives," he said. "And because what I saw in you last night is rare." You acted without fear, without calculation, even when you had every reason to hold on to what little you had. I let out a slow breath, absorbing that. And in return? I asked. He leaned back slightly, giving me space. In return, nothing immediate, he said. No contracts. No obligations you cannot walk away from. If anything, I would ask that if you ever find yourself in a position to do the same for someone else, you remember this moment. I looked at him for a long time after that, searching for something that did not fit. A flaw, a hidden condition. But there was none that I could see. Just a man who had made a decision, much like I had, based on something most people would have dismissed. Finally, I reached forward and picked up the envelope, turning it over in my hands. It felt light, simple, but I knew better than to underestimate what something like this could mean. And you are certain this is what you want to offer me? I asked. He nodded once. I am certain, he said. I slipped the envelope into my purse, placing it carefully beside the card he had given me. Then I will consider it, I replied. He smiled slightly, not in victory, but in acknowledgement. That is all I ask, he said. We finished our coffee in silence after that, the conversation having shifted into something quieter, more settled. When we stood to leave, he did not rush ahead or linger behind. He simply walked with me to the door, then paused. Whatever you decide, he said, make sure it is your decision. I met his eyes one last time. It will be, I said. Outside, the air felt colder, sharper, but I noticed something I had not felt before. It did not weigh on me the same way. I walked back toward the house slowly, my steps steady, my mind clear. When I reached the front door and stepped inside, Jessica was in the living room, papers spread out across the table, her phone pressed to her ear as she spoke in that same efficient tone. Ethan sat nearby, quiet, watching her, not noticing me at first. I took off my coat, placed it on the rack, and stood there for a moment, observing the scene in front of me. They were already moving forward with their plan, already deciding what came next. I stepped into the room, my presence finally registering. Jessica looked up, surprised. Oh, you are back, she said quickly. I was just going over the paperwork. We can sign everything today and have it processed by tomorrow. I nodded slowly, my expression calm, unchanged. That will not be necessary, I said. The room went quiet. Ethan looked at me, confusion flickering across his face. Jessica frowned slightly, lowering her phone. What do you mean? She asked. I met her eyes, holding her gaze with a steadiness she had not seen from me before. I mean, I said quietly, I will be making my own arrangements. I held my ground as the silence stretched across the room, the kind that makes people uncomfortable when they are not used to being challenged. Jessica was the first to react, her expression tightening just slightly before she forced a small smile that did not reach her eyes. I do not think you understand, she said, her tone shifting into something softer, almost rehearsed. We have already started the process. It is for your benefit. I looked at her steadily, not raising my voice, not stepping forward, just standing exactly where I was. I understand perfectly, I replied. That is why I am telling you it will not be necessary. Ethan shifted in his seat, running a hand through his hair as he looked between us. Mom, he said carefully, we are just trying to make sure you are taken care of. I turned to him, meeting his eyes, really looking at him in a way I had not allowed myself to for a long time. Taken care of, I repeated quietly, or moved out of the way. The words landed without force, but they did not need it. He looked down immediately, his silence answering more than anything he could have said. Jessica let out a small breath, her patience thinning. This is not about that, she said. This is about what is practical. You cannot stay here forever. I nodded once, acknowledging the statement without agreeing to it. You are right, I said. I will not be staying here. That caught her off guard. For a moment, she seemed unsure how to respond. Good, she said finally, her tone regaining its confidence. Then we are on the same page. I reached into my purse slowly, pulling out the envelope Daniel had given me, placing it on the table between us. Just not the same plan, I added. Jessica's eyes flicked to the envelope, then back to me. What is that? She asked. My arrangement, I replied. Ethan looked at the envelope, then at me, confusion deepening. What arrangement? He asked. I did not answer immediately. Instead, I let the moment settle, the weight of it shifting the dynamic in the room in a way neither of them had expected. One that does not involve me being placed somewhere convenient, I said calmly. Jessica crossed her arms slightly, her posture tightening. You cannot just make decisions like this without discussing them, she said. I held her gaze, my expression steady, unchanged. That is exactly what you have been doing, I replied. That silenced her. Not completely, but enough. Ethan looked at me again, this time with something closer to uncertainty than discomfort. What are you saying, Mom? He asked. I took a small breath, then spoke clearly. I am saying that I will be leaving, I said. But not to a place chosen for me. I will be choosing it myself. The room felt different now. Not louder. Not tense in the way arguments usually are. Just shifted, as if something that had been quietly assumed was no longer holding everything in place. Jessica glanced at Ethan, then back at me. And where exactly do you plan to go? She asked. There was a challenge in her tone now, subtle but present. I did not take the bait. That is already being handled, I said. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his voice softer. By who? He asked. I met his eyes again, holding them just long enough for him to understand that this was not something he controlled anymore. By someone who saw me, I said simply. He frowned slightly, not understanding, but I did not explain further. I picked up my coat from the rack and slipped it on, my movements unhurried, deliberate. Jessica watched me closely now, trying to read something she could not quite grasp. You are making a mistake, she said. I paused at the door, my hand resting lightly on the handle, then turned back to look at her. No, I said quietly. I am correcting one. Ethan stood up slowly, as if he might say something, but the words never came. I opened the door, the cold air meeting me again, sharper than before, but no longer unwelcome. As I stepped outside, I did not look back immediately. I walked down the path, each step steady, each movement grounded in a decision that was finally mine. At the edge of the driveway, I stopped for just a second, not to hesitate, but to acknowledge something I had carried for a long time. Then I kept walking. Behind me, the house remained exactly as it had been. Familiar, structured, controlled, but no longer defining. And as I moved forward into a future I had chosen for myself, I understood something with complete clarity. They had thought I was alone. They had thought I had nothing left to give. What they had failed to see was that the moment I gave away my last $5 was the moment I stopped belonging to the life they had planned for me. And from that point on, everything changed.